Hello and welcome to Business Daily from the BBC World Service, the business podcast which brings you the trends, the money and the people who make the world and its money go round. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
What if my retirement plans could keep pace with my goals?
When questions catch up with you, Merrill Edge Self-Directed can help. With personalized planning tools and guidance that help bring investing for retirement within reach, without breaking your stride. What would you like the power to do? Merrill, a Bank of America company. Get started at merrill.com/retire your way.
Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Member SIPC. Investment products are not FDIC insured or not bank guaranteed and may lose value.
People who value sleep on a Nectar mattress. But you're not going to believe me. After all, I might be lying. I must be lying. The only thing you know is true is that commercials lie to you. I must be lying.
Instead of believing silly commercials, trust the more than 2 million happy sleepers who sleep on a Nectar mattress. Nectar Sleep is currently running their biggest offer ever. $399 in accessories plus $100 off. A 365-night home trial and free shipping and returns. Go to nectarsleep.com today.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Business Weekly with me, Sasha Twining. On this week's programme, we'll hear about rising numbers of cyber stalking instances and how everyday tech is being used against unwitting partners. Plus, we'll talk about the sustainability factor of menstruation products and the new figures from Netflix that offer greater insight into audiences. But first, we're going to turn our attention to the rising COVID rates across many countries in Europe. We'll hear about the situation in Austria, Ireland, Poland and Russia in a moment. But first, Germany. And as the German Chancellor Angela Merkel told a group of German city mayors, the fourth wave is hitting our country with full force. Germany at this time of year is famous for its traditional Christmas markets, a hive of festive activity accompanied by the smell of spiced biscuits and Glühwein. But this year, like last, they are under threat. The large market in Munich has already been cancelled. Here's Bavaria's state premier, Markus Söder.
Das ist jetzt eine Woche der Wahrheit.
This week is a week of truth, maybe the last chance for countermeasures before we really get into a truly dramatic and uncontrollable position. The fact is, the longer you take to tackle coronavirus, the harder it becomes, and the longer it takes to stop the wave.
Markus Söder. Of course, a disappointment for those who come miles for the festive atmosphere, but as Mr. Söder said, a huge financial blow too. Bernd Oldman is from the Munich Association of Retailers.
The cancellation of the Christmas market is a total disaster. The retail trade lives from this market. Many tourists usually came to Munich for this reason. This market is part of Christmas in Bavaria. And for many citizens, this is a bad signal in Corona times. Many are tired of Corona and just want to celebrate Christmas at home with their family.
Bernd Oldman there. Well, let's move out now from Germany and look to its European neighbours. France has seen a surge in infections this week, with the top scientific advisor to the government saying he wouldn't rule out further work from home orders. And Ireland has reintroduced curfew times for pubs, nightclubs and restaurants. The hospitality sector there wants to reopen discussions on wage support schemes. In Russia, Moscow has reported a new high in the number of COVID-related deaths registered in a 24-hour period. And in Poland, officials have warned of the highest number of daily infections recorded since April. Sweden is introducing a COVID vaccination pass for the first time for many indoor events. And in the Czech Republic, those who have not been vaccinated will be banned from public events. The country that has made the biggest headlines, however, is Austria. Earlier in the week, it ruled that unvaccinated citizens would have to stay at home, but then just a few days later announced a snap lockdown for the entire country. More controversially, all citizens must now get vaccinated by the 1st of February next year. Here's the Chancellor, Alexander Schallenberg.
Die Bundesregierung und die Landeshauptleute sind da übereingekommen, Considering the seriousness of the situation and considering the infection rates, the federal government and the state premiers have agreed there's no other way than to introduce restrictive measures for everyone. Starting Monday, a nationwide lockdown will come into force for a maximum of 20 days. This will be evaluated after 10 days. It will automatically end on the 13th of December. From that date, this lockdown will no longer apply to the vaccinated and the recovered.
Kein Lockdown mehr. Aufgestachelt von diesen radikalen Impfgegnern.
Whipped up by radical anti-vaxxers, by fake news, too many among us didn't get vaccinated. The result is overcrowded intensive care units and enormous suffering. Therefore, we took a very difficult decision. The decision that we will quickly introduce a nationwide vaccine mandate. This will come into force by the 1st of February.
Bereits ab 1. Februar nächsten Jahres, 2022, gelten.
Austrian Chancellor Alexander Schallenberg. Well, Austria currently has record case numbers, just under 1,000 per 100,000, and also one of the lowest vaccination levels in Western Europe. Now, it's unclear yet how the mandatory all-citizen vaccination order will work, or what, or if there'll be any penalties for those who do not comply. Of course, one country's high number may be low in terms of what another country is dealing with, but it tends to be the speed of increase from whatever base that is alerting officials. So what is going on? Natasha Loder is the health policy editor at The Economist.
We're seeing quite a large number of countries in Europe with rapidly rising numbers of cases of COVID-19. People are obviously socialising more indoors, they're mixing more, and you've got issues to do with vaccination levels of various kinds, whether you had a high vaccination level to start with or whether you've got waning vaccinations from those who started early. And the extent to which each of these is going to play a role is going to depend on the country you're talking about. But some countries, quite surprisingly, like Germany, for example, have relatively low levels of vaccination, whereas others, Spain and Portugal and the United Kingdom, have quite high levels of vaccination. And so overall, we're seeing rising numbers of cases, and the outcome of that is going to vary depending on where you are.
I just also wonder whether we're seeing sort of a divergence between infection rates and subsequent deaths. In other words, people are getting ill but not as sick as before.
Yes, that's absolutely true. We shouldn't expect as many people to get sick and die as would have done had there been nobody vaccinated. Because guess what? Fundamentally, vaccines work. Who knew? But you do have an issue in quite a few countries that not enough people are vaccinated. What might seem quite a high level of vaccination, say 70, 75%, there's still enough people catching COVID and getting very sick that actually you're having, major incidents occurring. This wave that's coming now could cause an absolutely devastating situation for your hospitals and then, of course, knock-on impacts on mortality as well. And so some of these countries in Europe are sort of facing up to the fact that they have these rapidly rising numbers of cases, and actually the divergence between the infection rate and death rate is not wide enough. The sort of waning protection in the elderly is going to be where you're going to have your sort of risks. And so if you have a vaccinated group and it's been quite a long time since they were vaccinated, and you've got this sort of waning efficacy, it's there you could get breakthrough infections that are quite serious. And that's why people are doing boosters.
Yeah, I just wonder, actually, the booster campaigns, how much of a difference to the wave that we're now seeing in Europe should they make?
Well, they should make a huge difference, but that's going to depend on uptake, and it will depend on the right people getting them. And ideally what you want is people over the age of 65 getting their boosters and getting a flu shot at the same time, because it could be quite a nasty flu season this year. And if uptake of those two vaccines is good over the next couple of months, it could make a huge difference to the consequences in January. Another factor is potentially the availability of this antiviral drug, molnupiravir. If the EMA moves quickly to authorise that for emergency use, that might play a role also in how able we are to keep people out of hospital and out of mortuaries.
Natasha Loder from The Economist. Now, if you and I went back in time, say 50 years, and if I'd have said to you, stalking, I think we both would have pictured a stranger, most probably a man, following a woman at a covert distance down a dark street. Well, these days, if we use the term stalking, it is just as likely, if not more, to mean using tech, probably a mobile phone belonging to the victim, as a means of spying on their movements, conversations, friends and general life, without them having any idea at all. The perpetrator is now not so much a shadowy silhouette on a pavement, but a person that you've already invited into your life. To give you an idea, the number of devices infected with stalkerware has risen by 60% in a year. Here's the BBC's Ivana Davidovich with the details, and her findings are certainly eye-opening and at times a difficult lesson.
6 years ago, Maria, who lives on the east coast of America, finally ended her abusive marriage of 25 years. With the help of a church and close friends, she slowly formulated an escape plan. But even when she thought she was free from her husband's control, it was just a mirage.
The abuse, the mind control, started slowly, daily name-calling. And I'm going to be graphic here, but he would call me c***. He would call me hairy bitch, which to this day I have triggers. Like, I shave everything on my body because of the hair. I'm also 100 pounds, but he would call me fat every day. And he would slowly take over the bills, and I would hand, my paycheck over to him because I was never good in math, and calling me dumb. I was like, okay, he is smart, so let him take over the bills and things, not realizing this was a slow manipulation control of everything. I didn't realize how in debt we were with things. I come to find out that we were in trouble, and he was even taking credit cards out in my name because he had my Social Security number memorized. I was scared of him, and it's not always easy to gain access to a computer and get help, but I did get help through my church that helped me with a local nonprofit, and I moved in with my sister, and that's when the stalking began.
When did you first realize something is just wrong? This is not the normal stalking, if I can even use that term. Somebody just following you from where you lived. This is something different. How did it come about?
Finally, I'm free. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I got a laptop, I got my Facebook because he wouldn't allow me to have Facebook. So I had Facebook on my phone. I had Facebook on my computer. I connected with some of these gentlemen, and one in particular I was somewhat seeing. And my husband at the time was quoting things that I was typing to people or talking on the phone to people. And I'm like, I'm not sure how he's doing this, but I don't know. So I don't know if I was naive, but I just kept going about my life. I did look over my shoulder a lot more. At one point, I was going to go visit someone, and I left, get on the highway. All of a sudden, he's 2 cars behind me. And I ended up calling 911, and she said, come on I'm passing the state police station. She's like, pull in. And I didn't. I was, I think, terrified of what would happen if I pulled in. He had held a gun to his throat. He had held a gun to his head, and there were firearms in the house. So I think a little something inside of me was like, I don't know what's going to happen if you pull over. Is he going to follow me and pull a gun?
Maria was the victim of stalkerware, which are monitoring apps used for cyberstalking through the victim's smartphone. Including highly sophisticated software like Pegasus, which is used by governments and secret services, the industry is worth in excess of $12 billion. While Maria eventually managed to extricate herself from her ex-husband's clutches, other victims are not so lucky. And many feel alone because this type of cyber-enabled abuse is not only difficult to prove, but many have never even heard of it.
Your partner knows where you were last night, even though you did not tell them. Were there specific conversations that you've had with friends or family, and your partner knows exactly what was said?
How is that possible? It could be stalkerware. Stalkerware is commercially available software used to spy on another person via their device and without their consent.
In the domestic abuse cases that I see, some level of tech-enabled abuse is almost universally there. And often that tech-enabled abuse includes things like stalkerware. What's particularly alarming about stalkerware is less how common it is, though there are hundreds of thousands of infections that are being found every year, than that it is often linked to the most violent and disturbing cases because it is such a powerful tool of coercive control.
Eva Galperin from the Electronic Frontier Foundation co-founded the Coalition Against Stalkerware in late 2019. We heard one of their resource videos earlier designed for potential victims. Eva explained that the idea to look into stalkerware came to her when she discovered one of her fellow researchers was allegedly a rapist. She looked into reports from the alleged victims, and they were extremely concerned about their lives becoming completely ruined as their abuser was also a hacker.
At the time that I started my work, there were not a lot of mitigations for stalkerware. And part of the reason for that is that normally we would look to the AV industry. AV stands for antivirus. And what I discovered in 2018 was that the antivirus industry was reluctant to mark stalkerware as an unwanted program or as malware because they felt that there were possibly some legitimate uses for this. I managed to convince a few antivirus companies to take it more seriously and to create a special alert in some cases like Kaspersky. And we have really seen some great results. And the places where you normally see stalkerware proliferate are Android devices and desktop machines. For that, AV is extremely useful.
In October this year, Google pulled several stalkerware adverts for apps that encourage prospective users to spy on their partner's phone. These apps are often marketed to parents wishing to monitor their child's calls, messages, or location, but they've been repurposed by abusers to spy on their spouses. One of those apps, SpyPhone, was banned by the US Federal Trade Commission in September for harvesting and sharing data about people's movements and activities via a hidden device hack. Despite these positive moves, stalkerware apps and advice on how to use them are still easily accessible online. These are just two of the many tutorials I found on YouTube within minutes.
Hey guys, in this video I'm going to explain two very effective methods on how to install mSpy without having the target device in your physical possession.
I am going to show you how to spy on any type of phone without installing spyware, meaning that
Eva Galperin from the Coalition Against Stalkerware expects that SpyPhone won't be the only app on the FTC's stalkerware hit list.
There are definitely more companies out there. The other thing that the FTC is currently looking into that I think is very interesting are the companies that are purchasing location data, phone location data, and the companies that are selling the phone location data of users without their knowledge, which is an extremely powerful tool. And there have been a number of stories about the ways in which private investigators purchase this information and use it to track targets.
Eva Galperin. Technology has enabled violence against intimate partners in new, frightening, and often inescapable ways. After all, full access to someone's phone is essentially full access to someone's mind. And even those who are more tech-savvy can still fall prey to it.
My name is Zena Olson, and I'm a senior cybersecurity analyst for Fortune 500. So I was engaged, and really weird stuff kept happening with my phone. The battery would drain, it would just restart out of the blue, and my partner somehow knowing where I was all the time, even though I didn't tell him, and magically stuff getting deleted on my calendar and stuff getting added to my calendar, him knowing conversations that I'd never shared with him before, speaking with other victims of stalkerware. It finally dawned on me because honestly, when I'm in love with someone, I don't see that behavior or that activity is even possible. If it wasn't for the stalkerware and my experience with that, I never would have got into cybersecurity at all. It fueled me forward to get involved in an industry that I felt really needed representation from different perspectives.
And I'm interested why you felt that the industry itself needed different kind of influences.
after what had happened to you?
I became aware that some of my partner's friends seemed to condone that type of behavior, and I went to a cybersecurity/hacker meetup to ask for help. Basically, they said that it's pretty common and it happens all the time. There's this whole other world of professionals. It's almost like a cultural acceptance of being able to track what your partner is doing.
A quick internet search will bring up many websites claiming they can hack into someone's smartphone with only a number, usually for a few $100s, to be sent in Bitcoin. While the software with those capabilities may be accessible to law enforcement agencies, all of the experts I've talked to believe that these websites are scams. Consumer-grade stalkerware largely relies on social engineering, which people can learn to be careful about. Here's Zina Olsen again.
For instance, with mobile rats. So a mobile remote access Trojan. So think of malware, but for your phone. Remote access tools that they can use on your Android devices. They just say use social engineering. So that could be email, that could be sending a smishing, which is basically a text message with links in it, where you click on it. They can also use apps masquerading as legitimate apps. Even me, I know a little bit about cybersecurity, right? Even myself, I would have a hard time finding some of these apps. But still, if you see like a random extra calculator app or something that you don't remember installing and it looks pretty benign, but when you go to click on it, it says it'll wipe all your data. Sometimes they use scare tactics to get the users not to remove whatever app it is. So just keep that in mind. They use a lot of social engineering techniques, a lot of fear-based things to get the users not to remove the app. You can get AV for your phone, and if all else fails and you're not going to press legal charges, just do a factory reset on your phone and redo all of the passwords and set up 2FA for everything. That's what I did in my case. I don't think there's enough laws out there addressing the harassment and the issues that people face with tech abuse. I don't think the legislation has caught up with what is going on in our environment.
Cybersecurity expert Zina Olsen. For Eva Galpering, however, devising new legislation is no panacea for stalkerware.
I think that this is not a problem that we can expect new legislation to solve. Most countries already have some sort of wiretapping statute. Most countries have some sort of anti-harassment and anti-stalking laws. The big problem right now is that people are unable to detect when they are being spied on and unable to get law enforcement to act even when they have this information.
So what is the solution then? Is it to just lean much more on companies that make these sort of products? How do you see it then? What is the way forward?
Well, I've been taking a multi-pronged approach. The first involves hardening the Apple and Android ecosystems in order to make it harder and harder for this kind of software to work properly. And that is easier for Apple to do than for Google to do because Google does not have complete control over the Android ecosystem. As a free software advocate, that is great. It gives us great power. But it's also what enables spyware to thrive. What both Google and Apple can do, again, is to make it impossible to get these things on any of the stores that they provide. Finally, there is training for the people who are working in field of domestic abuse, and especially for law enforcement, because one of the biggest problems that I see over and over again is that survivors come to law enforcement, expect them to enforce the law, and essentially get gaslit and told that there's no problem.
Eva Galperin, founder of the Global Coalition Against Stalkerware, speaking to Ivana Davidovich. Coming up after the break, we'll talk about India's smog levels. They've been classified as hazardous this week, plus why some users are demanding a different, more sustainable way of dealing with menstruation. And we'll also end with news from Netflix. The streaming service has given more detail on just how popular its shows are. That's all after the break. Hello and welcome back to Business Weekly, our look at some of the big stories that have been impacting our world this last week. And impacting in a very obvious visual way if you've been in India, in Delhi. Toxic smog has blanketed the region And the measurements of PM2.5, that's the tiny particles that can clog people's lungs, are, according to the World Air Quality Project, running at measurements of between 330 and 500. Now, to give you an idea, 50 is considered good and 100 is satisfactory. India's levels are characterised as hazardous. Well, the BBC's Arunade Mukherjee is in Delhi.
The first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is you want to check that your windows and doors are shut, because otherwise it gets very smoky inside the house. But when you do go out for your daily errands or something important, the first thing that hits you is this burning sensation in your eyes. You get an itch in your throat. You have a little bit of a stuffy sensation inside. You want to cough. You are double masked, obviously, because of the pandemic. It does help to a certain extent with the smog. The air is acrid. It's almost toxic, and you can smell it all the time. We've been switching on the air purifiers at home when we sleep, especially. When you first switch on the air purifier at the end of the day, it gives you figures of like 600 to 700, and then it takes a long time for it to come down to double figures. That's when you really realize statistically what you're breathing through the day. And this is something that, youngsters, little babies, the elderly are breathing right after somehow recovering from a very deadly second wave, which in fact impacted the respiratory system. So you can imagine it's a really toxic, acrid sort of a sensation. So even as I speak to you, Sasha, I've got everything shut, and that's how we operate.
I'm assuming, though, that not everyone has air purifiers in their home.
That's right, because air purifiers are an expensive proposition. And, at a time when people need them the most, you also see the prices rise. The cheapest is about $130, and it can go up to $500 to $600.
The situation you describe sounds really grim, really difficult. We're seeing pictures where you can sort of see the smog as well. There's like a haze. And I don't know whether that's sort of a clever picture, if you like, or whether actually when you go outside you can see it in the air.
You can. You can. And when you see it, the first thing you think, you don't want to breathe that. On a clear day, I can see buildings across from me about 5 to 6 kilometers away from me. But on these kind of days, there's a heavy smog. It's almost like you can actually reach out and cut it.
Let's hear now from Delhi's Environment Minister, Gopal Rai, speaking about this. And he said that the government had no choice but to act. So here he is earlier this week.
The problem of pollution has increased after Diwali, and it has changed a lot in the last 10 days. That's why the Delhi government is taking steps at different levels. From today, all schools, colleges and institutes in Delhi have been closed. Construction activities have been stopped, and employees and officers in the government offices have been told to work from home.
So, Arunade, what is the feeling about the way that the government, either nationally or locally, is handling this?
There is a fair bit of irritation amongst the public, because this is not a surprise to anyone. Sasha, this happens every year. It's almost like a script that plays out year after year, and it's only getting worse every successive year. So the basic question people are saying is that this is going to happen at this time. Why don't you take preemptive measures? Everything that is now being done is basically reactive, they're not preemptive. So you are basically taking decisions which are stopgap, which are knee-jerk reactions, which are quick fix solutions. Like, you've got the pollution is bad, let's shut down the schools. But can you keep doing that every time the pollution hits record levels? You can't keep shutting down schools. You can't keep asking government employees, like they've done, to work from home. You can't stop construction activity forever, like they've done right now till the end of this week. You can't stop heavy vehicles from coming into the capital like you've done at the moment. So you need to come up with some sort of a holistic long-term solution, is what experts say.
Is there an answer?
It's anyone's guess right now, because it's something that people are still figuring out what to do. There was a decision to install these big smog towers in Delhi.
What's a smog tower?
So it's this massive, it's a massive installation that's been put up in the middle of Delhi, which essentially purifies the air. It's like a giant air purifier. But the thing is that it only allows purification of a certain perimeter around it. So once you're outside that, it doesn't help. We've seen it deteriorate year after year, and we're not seeing any solutions that are being discussed. It's almost like they wait for this to happen every year, and then you take these quick decisions. For instance, right now, the government said that that, look, wind speeds are expected to pick up on the 21st of November, so we don't need to worry. Once the wind speeds pick up, the particulate matter in the air is going to be dissipated and you're going to have better days ahead. But the Supreme Court essentially came back to that and responded to say that, look, you can't expect nature to come to your rescue every time. You're just kind of at the mercy of nature. You need to think of ways to really tackle this.
Arunaday Mukherjee there. Now we're going to talk about periods, menstruation, the time of the month, however it may be referred to in your part of the world. Now, I appreciate that this may seem like an unusual subject to cover on a business programme, but when more or less half of the globe are expected at some stage in their life to have a monthly cycle, then it's big business for the companies who provide sanitary products. Actually, it's not just a business issue. It's a sustainability challenge too. Consider, if you will, the sheer volume of sanitary products used and disposed of globally every year. And then on top of that, the challenge of inequality, how to ensure that everyone who needs to can afford the products they require. Well, Tamazin Ford now talks about the rise in sales of an item known as period pants to see if they can help the climate and fight period poverty at the same time.
For every person on the planet who menstruates, I'm sure you have a story like Marissa Meltzer's, a writer in New York.
A few years ago, I had probably been menstruating for 25 years at the time, and one would think that, I don't know, I was more on top of things or learned my lesson. I hadn't. Basically, I was reporting a story at a jazz festival on Governor's Island. It's about like a 5-minute ferry ride from Brooklyn or Manhattan. And it was August in New York, which is a very sort of swampy and humid time. And so I was wearing just this kind of oversized white linen dress with white underwear and a tote bag and nothing else. I had spent all day running around and interviewing people and not thinking much of it. And a woman stopped me. She said, I think that you might have sat in something. And I didn't really understand what she was talking about. And she said, here, I brought you water. You might want to go to the porta potties and take a look. And I went and I had a giant period stain on my dress and nothing to cover it up with. I took it off. I rinsed it out. I tried to sort of like cover it with a tote bag or something, but it was terrible. One of the worst days of my life. I was so embarrassed.
Marissa tried out period pants for the first time for an article she was writing for the Guardian newspaper. She told me what she thought of them.
There's plenty to get over with period pants, right? Like you are bleeding into your underwear, which is a kind of a strange sensation. But there are some real advantages in that. I think, for one, they can be pretty cost effective. People are getting their periods, it seems, younger and younger. And for someone who's quite young and afraid of, a tampon, or someone who has mobility or any kind of, mental health issues, it can be, I think, a boon for them to be able to just slip on a pair of period pants and kind of be done with it.
Are you a convert now?
I'm a convert for sleeping in them and wearing them on, say, the last day of my period. For me, I'm 44 and got my period, I think, when I was, 13 or something like that. So I have about 30 years of tampon use behind me. And so I'm just really used to that feeling of having the blood not make contact with underwear or the world in any way and have it being absorbed inside of me. I think it's too late for me to give up entirely. I don't think I'll forgo tampons anytime soon. I have a subscription to an organic cotton tampon line that I haven't canceled yet.
While Marissa's not a full convert, millions of others are, and period pants have become big business. They've been around since the 1990s, but it's really in the last few years they've taken off. There are now dozens of brands to choose from. They're made from super absorbent and odour-eliminating fabric and come in virtually every style. thongs, bikini briefs, sleep shorts, and even ranges of sportswear. Maria Molland is the CEO of period underwear company Thinks, based in New York. She told me that sales of their underwear, ranging from $17 to $34 a pair, have boomed during the pandemic.
We started the business back in 2014, and so that's when our first products launched. The category has changed dramatically since that period of time, and we've grown the business substantially. We're doing over $100 million in revenue this year. When I joined 4.5 years ago, we were more in the $20 million range. So a lot of growth in 4 years, in particular during the pandemic, where people with periods and people with incontinence were looking for healthier solutions, both for the planet and for their bodies. And were willing to try new things, right? Because they had the safety of their couch rather than being in a public forum. And those things have really driven a lot of our business over the last few years.
Do you think they're still a bit niche, though? Do you think they're mainstream enough yet? Or have you reached that point where you think you've passed that turning point where actually we're no longer a niche product? Or has that not arrived yet?
No, it's definitely arrived. I mean, I will tell you, before the pandemic, we went through a fundraise, and I think that was the big question as to will this really scale up to $100+ million and be a true alternative to disposables? That has really changed. I mean, our business would actually even be bigger than $100 million this year. We've actually had to turn away a lot of business just because we don't have the infrastructure and the number of people, right, to be able to effectively serve all the retailers that have wanted our products. So I think it's changing. I think consumers are demanding the change and retailers are paying attention. And of course, our D2C business is growing substantially as well because consumers can come directly. So the market overall, if you look at 2 years ago in 2019, before the pandemic really started, the researchers were saying it would be, as a category, about $400 million by 2026. Well, this year, they're coming in at nearly 4 times that, at nearly $1.4 billion for the same year, right? So just massive increase because it has surpassed that tipping point and become a true alternative.
Maria Molland, CEO of period underwear company Thinks. On average, every person who menstruates uses more than 11,000 period products in their lifetime. Tampons, applicators, sanitary pads, and very little of that is recyclable. Many products contain plastic and chemicals that very often end up in our environment. Rochelle Byrne is the executive director of the environmental charity Greener Future in Toronto. They focus on litter cleanups, and one of the main things they find washing up on the beach is tampon applicators.
Tampons and pads make up the majority of the waste when it comes to period products. And because there's so many people using these products on a daily basis, there's billions that are going into the waste stream every single day. We think of putting it in the garbage can, we put it at the curb, it gets taken away and it's gone. But that's not how it really works. Nothing is ever really gone. It's all somewhere here on the planet. And for items that have plastic in them, it means that they're going to be on the planet for a very, very long time because plastic doesn't biodegrade.
There are other sustainable alternatives to tampons and pads, not just period pants. There's the menstrual cup, cotton pads which are washable, reusable tampon applicators, as well as organic biodegradable tampons and pads. Rochelle has tried them all.
It takes some trial and error to find out what you like, but in the long run, it can save a ton of waste because these are reusable products and they last years if you take care of them. And it also saves a lot of money because you might pay a little bit more up front, but those products can last you for years. So you're not paying for pads and tampons on a monthly basis.
But why should the onus be up to us to change? Why shouldn't it be on the manufacturers to produce products without plastic, to produce tampons that are biodegradable, sanitary pads that can go down the toilet and won't harm our system? Why is the onus always on us as the consumer to change?
And that is a concerning issue, and it shouldn't be that way. But the thing is if we don't use our voices, then nothing will change. And if we use our dollars and spend them on the things that we believe in, then that will cause the corporations to change and make products that we want. The more tampons we buy, the more tampons are going to be made by big companies that don't necessarily put a lot of time into making change.
Rochelle Byrne from Greener Future in Toronto. So period pants might be a solution to the hundreds of thousands of tonnes of period waste produced each year, but are they really affordable? The average person spends around $200 on period products a year. That's not taking into account the millions of people around the world who don't have money to buy any period products at all. Period pants range from about $10 a pair to more than $100 a pair. So yes, they're cost effective in the long run, but if someone can't afford to buy a pack of tampons, they certainly can't afford to buy a $10 pair of pants.
Period poverty is just the inability to be able to afford period products when you have your period.
Helen Lynn is from the Women's Environmental Network, a charity working on issues that connect gender, health and the environment. She's based in London.
People should have real choice in terms of the different products they wish to use. Pants mightn't be for everybody, pads mightn't be for everybody, and I think it's important to have that choice. But as well that they must be affordable. I mean, we've had tampon tax on products for years before anyone even started campaigning about it. I mean, how unfair was that? So, we must be looking at other solutions to this issue. And it's disgraceful, really, that people can't afford products when they're having their period. But it mustn't be products at any cost, especially cost to health. We must make sure they're safe as well.
Helen says governments need to step up in terms of providing free period products and creating laws aimed at ending period poverty.
We are seeing as well a move from certain councils in this country to provide free period products, not just in schools and universities, but in toilets and lavatories as well for people, and to possibly look at schemes like the reusable nappy schemes where people are giving vouchers to be able to afford to buy 6 or 7 different pads or pants at a time, and that might be an option as well. At this time, we're actually working on a campaign calling on our government and lots of other governments as well to provide legislation on period products, because the current legislation is just a general legislation for all products and doesn't cover period products specifically. They're not even mentioned in it. So we think there needs to be proper legislation on all period products, reusable and single-use disposables. And as part of this legislation, we need to be addressing period poverty in that as well.
Helen Lynn from the Women's Environmental Network, a charity working on issues that connect gender, health and the environment, speaking there to Tamazin Ford. Finally, a little bit of this. Yep, the recognisable sounds of Netflix. The streaming company has this week released figures showing the top 10 most popular by hours viewed. Hang on, I hear you cry. What's new about that? Surely we've always known how many people watch Netflix shows. Well, yes and no. There's been mutterings from some quarters about the lack of transparency in Netflix audience data, a lack of concrete detail on how many are watching and when. Now, we still don't know that, but to date, this is the clearest indication of the popularity of its shows that Netflix has offered. And to be clear, it's never had to publish these figures. It doesn't have advertisers to attract, for example. But now we do know a bit more. Caroline Frost is a media and entertainment commentator. So what do we know now?
Gosh, well, this is an exciting week for the TV industry as a whole because, of course, Netflix has been the unknown element for so many years. The history is that it turned up and obviously kind of conquered the world with its original content. But all of its big hits since 2013, the likes of House of Cards, Orange is the New Black, The Crown, Stranger Things, we're told that they're world-beating, they're phenomenal. The numbers are absolutely just jaw-dropping. But we've never known. We've had to take Netflix's word for it. And clearly what's happened is that has caused a lot of grumbles because producers, filmmakers have all said, well, how can we possibly negotiate? Netflix has all the power. It takes our content, it takes our intellectual property, it broadcasts in inverted commas, but we don't know how much of a hit it really is. So when it comes to negotiating terms and funding for further projects, either with Netflix or with other platforms or distributors, they've got no figures that they can boast. So it's all been a bit word of mouth. And obviously that's played to Netflix's favour. And what's happened is that nature abhors a vacuum. So independent companies have come along recently and said, well, we can actually provide you with that data by taking personal historical data from Netflix users and selling it on to rivals. Now, of course, that's not happy listening for Netflix, and it's not a good look in the sort of spirit of wanting to be seen as an awards contender, a broadcaster, a distributor, a program maker. Or like all those other people, it wants to be more transparent. It's a better look come 2021. And so it's saying, no, fine, we've always told you a sort of hype that something like, I don't know, Stranger Things is the biggest show in the world. We're now going to prove it with some figures.
This is the reason as to why now, is it? They want to be in control of the data before anybody else fills that space for them.
Yes, but they'll be able to sort of curate the knowledge still. All they're going to give us each week is their top 10. So it'll be a bit like the top 40 in music charts around the world. You'll be able to know how well something's done. It should be there. So something like Tiger King 2 comes along, people will expect to see Tiger King 2 in that top 10. Otherwise, what's all the hype about? I think it will be quite revealing, though, because we might just see that some things that don't get the hype, like Sex Education, third series, has done really well in Europe, hasn't had a fraction of the hype of Tiger King 2 or Selling Sunset or these big shows that Netflix really do get behind. But it does very, very well. Similarly, the sitcoms, the rewatches, Friends, Big Bang Theory, Brooklyn 99, they're kind of like the ballast that prop Netflix up. I mean, there's a reason that over 200 million people now subscribe to Netflix. They don't all want to watch The Crown, Queen's Gambit. They just want to dip back in to watch Friends. So they'll get their transparency being recognised as well. So it'll be very, very revealing to see just what is important to Netflix and what just gets a lot of hype.
Do you think this will change the type of content it produces? Because one of the arguments that they've given in the past for keeping data private was that they wanted producers to produce what they thought would work and not be driven by those nightly numbers.
I mean, what we've seen in recent times is, fortunately for Netflix, critical acclaim has coincided with a massive hit. I'm talking about, of course, Squid Game.
Every person standing here in this room is living on the brink of financial ruin. You all have debts that you can't pay off. If you do not wish to participate, then please let us know at this time.
Shouldn't be killing each other like this!
A player who refuses to play will be eliminated.
Increasingly, what they will be reaching out for are those localised surprise content creators. I mean, already Netflix have been investing in what we've called localised content. So they've now got regional hubs in Asia, in the UK, very beneficially for the production ecosystem of content creators across the UK. Netflix are wanting those tiny hits that they kind of reach out for, very much like football talent scouts. They don't necessarily want the big hitters. There is money for that. We've seen that with some of their content, big names coming across to make their lovely artistic passion project, like Martin Scorsese, like Alfonso Cuarón, the Oscar winner, making Roma and it turning up on Netflix. But also there's room for these lovely little surprise hits that just sort of get the Netflix welly of love and turn into these global phenomenons like Squid Game, like Queen's Gambit. So I really think that we'll see an expansion of great original content, but also there has to be room for these repeat sitcoms that we still just love after all these years, because we will see the numbers for them as well. I think it's going to be a very revealing time.
Now, Christmas, I assume, is a big time for Netflix. At least it always used to be for linear TV and the cinemas. Is it the case for streaming as well?
Increasingly so. This is a very new thing. So, of course, it's always been linear TV's time. We know about the schedules coming out to huge fanfares in October and November, people ringing the programmes that they want to watch. It used to be all about the big film. They don't have the budget for that anymore. They're having to rely very much on Christmas specials of already established TV so that people have a reason to watch. Meaning, of course, that there's also an alternative now. The streamers have come on board last year. The big surprise hit of Christmas was Bridgerton, a sort of mock fantasy period drama, which was brand new content from Netflix. It cleaned up. People were binging even on Christmas and Boxing Day. I suppose you could say that there's a captive audience for it, for people sitting on their sofas recovering from their Christmas lunches. But it is interesting that there's such a new player in town. This year, similarly, they've put $200 million or more behind a huge new film, Don't Look Up.
I hear there's something you don't like the looks of.
We discovered a very large comet.
Oh, good for you. It's headed directly towards Earth.
This comet is what we call a planet killer.
At this exact moment, I say we sit tight and assess.
Sit tight?
How big is this thing going? Can it destroy my ex-wife's house? Is that possible?
There's a 100% chance that we're all going to die!
This stars Jennifer Lawrence, Leonardo DiCaprio, Jonah Hill, Ariana Grande, Meryl Streep. It's an apocalyptic comedy, which sounds like a contradiction in terms, but they are clearly expecting to do similar numbers. And I think the fact that they are launching that in time for Christmas shows just how much attention they're giving the festive period, which again brings them online with linear broadcasters. More and more we're seeing that Netflix is trying to take the place both of a studio, a film studio, but also a television broadcaster.
Caroline Frost there. As always, we love to hear from you. Our email address is world.business@bbc.co.uk. This programme was produced by Matthew Davis and edited by Martin Webber. Until next week, thanks for listening.
Rapidly rising prices.
People infected with COVID.
Feeling the brunt of climate change.
The world is so connected that if you really want to understand what's going on where you live, you also need to know what's going on elsewhere.
It's a really important issue.
It's going to be very difficult. So, twice a day, the Global News Podcast brings you a snapshot of the most important stories from around the world.
A huge political issue.
A full-scale invasion.
The race against the clock.
An historic day.
And with BBC reporters stationed across the globe, you can be sure that we're telling you what's really going on.
Our correspondent in Washington,
in Beirut, in Nairobi.
The Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service.
It's stunning.
Search for the Global News Podcast.
What if my retirement plans could keep pace with my goals?
When questions catch up with you, Merrill Edge Self-Directed can help. With personalized planning tools and guidance that help bring investing for retirement within reach, without breaking your stride. What would you like the power to do? Merrill, a Bank of America company. Get started at merrill.com/retire your way.
Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Member SIPC. Investment products are not FDIC insured or not bank guaranteed and may lose value.